Hello, students, and welcome to ninth grade biology at TAISM, the American International School of Muscat. My name is Mr. Gibney, and I'm excited to be your teacher for this upcoming year. If you're at TAISM right now, I'd like to thank Mrs. Johnson, the eighth grade science teacher at TAISM, for introducing me to the next generation science standards, which will play a huge role in this course. I would also like to thank Mr. Sharnitsky, the former biology teacher here at TAISM, who is now a consultant, who spent a lot of time with me helping to plan this course and to make it come to fruition. This course follows the curriculum to the left over here, and this curriculum comes from the state of California in the US. We are an American school, and it embodies the next generation science standards. And we'll go through this presentation. Please feel free to pause the presentation and to type up questions for me, etc., and then I'll be happy to answer them. Okay, so what will you learn, or really, what will you investigate this year? You will investigate phenomena, just like you've been doing in eighth grade if you've been here at TAISM, and you'll investigate problems. And so these will be engineering pieces, and these will be explanations that we can do with science. And so here are some examples that we'll do, and we'll do many more. We'll look at things like fortune-telling fish, or something to start us off with science's inquiry. We'll then jump into ecology with sea turtles in Oman, and coral bleaching in Dominion Islands. Antibiotic resistance, sickle cell anemia, cancer, and Terry Fox, and lactose intolerance, and the Gulf of Oman dead zone. And we'll definitely tackle COVID-19 and what's going on there in a biology aspect, and many more. So that's what you'll investigate. That's what you'll learn about. And what will you do? So how will you investigate these phenomena? Well, you investigate them by doing what scientists do. And so scientists ask questions, and these are the scientific practices for the next generation science standards. Scientists work on constructing explanations on what do they think about. They work on using models and mathematics and computational thinking. And then, of course, they do investigations or experiments. It's probably the number one thing you think about with a science class. And then once they have those experiments, they analyze the data, and they're going to try and communicate that information and engage in argument. And arguments aren't just people yelling at each other. They're people trying to give forth ideas and debate them. And probably the most important thing about engaging in argument from evidence is claim, evidence, and reasoning. I know you've done a lot of that with Mrs. Johnson, and she's really developed me on it. And we're going to work hard on how does our evidence support our claim with scientific reasoning. What justifies it? So that's what you will do. That's how you'll do those investigations. Now, how will you think? Well, you'll think using your brain, obviously, but hopefully we'll develop some thought patterns, right? And these come from the cross-cutting concepts in the next generation science standards. It's an area I'm definitely working on, but we'll ask you, what do you notice? What kind of patterns do you see? How does it work? We'll deal a lot with in biology, cause and effect and structure and function. How does the structure of a molecule lead to its function? And then what's happening in the system? If we take the universe as a whole and then we take a smaller part of it, we get a system model. And we can look at energy and matter in there, and scale and quantity, and stability and change, especially with climate change. Okay, so those were the next generation science standards, the content, the scientific practices, and the cross-cutting concepts. So here's a little overview of the units. As you look at these, I want you to think, how are they all interconnected, right? Sometimes biology gets taught as like a pizza pie, as a bunch of different units, but we know that they're all connected to make our interconnected world. So we'll start with ecology. We'll start on the big scale, and we'll talk about the Earth, and we'll look at some fun experiments. We'll talk about Robert Payne's experiment where he threw starfish out of tidal pools, and he discovered what a keystone species is. This happened, I believe, in Oregon or Washington State, out on the west coast of the US. We'll talk about what happens if you remove parts of an ecosystem due to human encroachment upon territory. We'll talk about invasive species. This is a picture of Asian carp that are a big problem in the Midwestern United States, and they're taking over waterways there. And we'll use some math, right? We'll look at exponential growth and logistic growth and say, what's going on with these populations? So that's ecology on a macro scale, looking at organisms and how they interact with their environment. We'll then get into some of the biogeochemical cycles, especially the carbon cycle, which is really important. We'll see how carbon can move from the air into plants, and then we eat plants, and we use the carbon inside of sugar or inside of plants to be able to release energy for us to use, and then that makes more carbon dioxide that plants use. How are humans affecting this with human emissions? And this is a really fun unit. A lot of students love to say that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell as a meme, and we'll learn why that is. So that's Unit 2 with photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Unit 3 will dive into evolution, and this will take us to about the semester break here at TAISM in the wintertime. And I really like this quote from Sean Carroll. Mutation is random, but natural selection is not. And so we'll really use that to construct an explanation for antibiotic resistant bacteria and what's going on with that. And so here you can see a graph of that in the bottom left. We can also use that to talk about COVID-19. We'll do some examples with rock pocket mice as well. And then we'll talk about, the history of life on Earth and how species diverge, etc. And this is a picture of Charles Darwin's famous phylogenetic tree dealing with evolution. So we've been on the big, we went small with photosynthesis and respiration, and we kind of went big again with evolution. Embedded in that evolution unit, I should have said, is we'll deal with fossils as well, right? And because fossils are great pieces of evidence of evolution. We'll then get into the story of you. And for many people, this is their favorite part of biology because it deals with DNA and genetics and how genes are passed down. And it's so fascinating. So I'll make that into like a smaller subunit. And then we'll get into mitosis and meiosis and cancer. And we'll talk Terry Fox and what was going on there. So here is a big picture of the story of you unit. And then if you wanted to get more in depth, you can see something that I created here for my students in virtual school this year. And so you could pause the video and go through it. I won't go through the whole flow chart here because that would get a little long, but this is also where I put homeostasis in the curriculum. So your body trying to keep things balanced or the same. All right, so by the end of the story of you, we'll have gone over genetics and DNA, but now we want to get a little more into how your body works. And this is pretty fun. It's what's called a structural segment 5. It's going from cells to organ systems. And so we'll deal with, okay, well, what makes up cells? What are atoms and elements? And then how do they make things like proteins? And then those can make up a cell. And how do you have different cells throughout your body, right? Every cell that you're looking at on me, pretty much every cell has the same DNA, but they have different, they're specialized, they're different. Why are my eye cells different than my heart cells? And that'll be fun to think about and look at. And just like this is a simplification of how your body works, it can be more in depth, right? And so this just shows more in-depth pictures of the elements of life: sulfur, phosphorus, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, and hydrogen, and then some of the molecules that they can make up, like carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and phospholipids, water, DNA. My face is covering up energy or ATP. And then just here's some specialized cells and things that cells do, right? They get in oxygen and they get rid of carbon dioxide. Then they have functions, right? And so here's an example of a cell making an antibody to fight off something, maybe something like the coronavirus. And then we'll finish up the year with going back to ecology and talking about a system model for climate change and what's going on as the amount of greenhouse gases rise, things like carbon dioxide, and what that's doing to Earth, and what are some of the ramifications of that. All right, so here's my ending slide here. What's most important? I think what's most important is learning how to think and work like a scientist. So the thinking being the cross-cutting concepts, and then the doing being the scientific practices as you investigate phenomena. I'm really excited to work with you this upcoming year. I can't wait. Feel free to email me with any questions, thoughts, or concerns, and have a great summer. Stay safe.